Alright, so this morning we're going go fly a little bit. My friend Tim in his Super Stol. We're following him down. And kind of the first flight to venture away from the airport. Hopefully it all goes well. Coolant and oil temps look good. Oil pressure looks good. I went ahead and brought the computer to data log it. I'll follow you when you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready if you are.
Yep.
Roger. So that came up to temp pretty quick then.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, mine's been running to 602. Nice. I'm gonna bump and go as well.
Should probably start heading for the barn too.
Yeah, I hear you. Alright, I'll bump this one and I'll be on your tail.
Alright guys, so sorry it's been a little while since we've done a video, and I left off the last video, so I was going to go down and fly on the river and start putting the airplane through its paces. So that's what we did. We went down with my friend Tim with his Super Stol. You can check him out at Super Stol 50 on Instagram. He also has a YouTube channel you can check out. He's got some good stuff on the Super Stol. But on the way home, after flying for about 45 minutes, started to notice that I was getting some fluctuation in the oil pressure. Something that I was keeping an eye on. Another friend of mine just gave me a heads up that running it off the scavenge line may cause some aeration in the oil, which could cause a fluctuation in the oil pressure. So I kept an eye on it most of the day, but as we got through the flight in about 45 minutes or so, I did start to see this fluctuation. So on the right side of the panel here, I'll put up an arrow so you can see what I'm talking about. The oil pressure value is swapping around from 60s to 50s to 40s. You get a 70 in there. It's just bouncing around. And previously that's been rock solid at between 55 and 60. So it hasn't moved. So seeing this fluctuation is definitely caused by my oil cooling system that I've added. And running it off a non-pressure oil line on the scavenge line is the potential cause of it. So I took this information, I was data logging the flight, and I decided to go ahead and send this data log to Brian Dacus so he could take a closer look at it. Alright guys, so after the last video, we had some success with the oil cooling. And I posted this up on how I did this on the aircraft, or Yamaha aircraft conversion webpage on Facebook. Get a lot of comments there to help one another out. If you guys are interested in the Yamaha, you should definitely check out that page. One of the comments was from my friend Jason Bussat up in Canada. He owns Badass Power Sports and is an Edge performance dealer. And he had some concerns about the way I was running the oil off the scavenge line. So here's your scavenge line right here. Comes down to the oil cooler, then out of the oil cooler and comes back up this hose to the reservoir. That's typically not how you're going to run an oil cooler. Oil coolers should be run off of pressure line. So here's where your oil filter goes. And most times people put a sandwich plate with two outlets, one outlet, one inlet, and then they stack the oil filter on top of that. Had a hard time finding one that was going to fit in that really tight space there. So I went with the scavenge line option. One of the things he mentioned was to be, extra cautious on watching the oil pressure, because if this scavenge line gets aerated, because that's what happens when the oil comes out the bottom of it, it's got air in it, and the flow may be interrupted because of the extra resistance of the cooler. Anyway, long story short, we wanted to make sure we weren't having a problem with the oil pressure. Well, it turns out we did. So after about 40 minutes into a longer flight, I did start to see the oil pressure fluctuate around. And so let me have Brian Dacus explain the data logging that we did on this engine to diagnose this issue, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do as a solution.
This is Brian with BD Turnkey Engines, reviewing one of Brian Bowen's last engine data logs here. He sent me this. He has some concern about possible oil aeration and low oil pressure at certain times of his flight. So we did some data logging, and I graphically display it here. So this main graph right here is the main flight. It's approximately a 50-minute flight from startup being cold all over here to taxiing to the first takeoff at the field, about a 20-minute cruise in this area. And he said he was out at some gravel bars on the Sacramento River and did 4 or 5, looks like 5 takeoff and landings here. You can see them clearly. So on this display, the yellow is throttle position. The red is engine RPM, so they often kind of coincide, go up and down together. The light blue here, cayenne color, is the oil temperature. That was been one of his latest big concerns. It looks like he's got that under control. The green is engine coolant temp, and this light purple here, lavender color, is the oil pressure, and that's what we're going to look at today and really focus in on. So we can take a look. Let's look here at the very beginning. Cold startup. It'll make some sense here of what's going on with the graph. So with the scroll mouse, you can zoom in on any bit of the data. So we see here 0 engine RPM, 0 throttle position, coolant temp 66, oil temp 68. This is a good thing to do on startup is make sure all your temperatures, even EGTs, you can see here 67 across the board, 68, 66, they're all within what 2-3 degrees of each other. Oil pressure 1. So he gives it a little throttle, getting prepared to start the engine, cranks it over. You can see some engine RPM there. Cam and crank sensors sync. The engine fires right here, 1700 RPMs, throttle, coolant 66, 69, oil pressure comes alive. And these numbers here these colors will change with the values. So if something is red, it's to take a look at and be concerned. Obviously coolant temp at 67 degrees is not a temperature that you would take off and fly at. So here we go. It's the engine's warming up. EGTs are coming alive. We'll zoom out here. You can see the green line, engine coolant, starting to pick up. Oil temp starting to pick up as we scroll along. The numbers on the left there will change. You can see the coolant temp here as we approach 120 degrees is kind of the minimum to do your run up. You see that it turns green as we approach 120. Oil temperature is getting warmer, so we will see a typical decrease in oil pressure. Pretty normal. Here's engine RPM, so this was some idling warm up. Now he's giving it some throttle, probably taxiing here. Throttle position down here, you can see it coinciding with the engine RPM. Oil pressure, everything looks good. We're at 65, everything's in the green. Right, taxiing out to the runway. Here's the first takeoff right here, high RPM, high throttle position. So he rolls into the throttle. You can see these change. 99% throttle position, 9100 RPMs. It peaks here at, where does it peak at? 90, that's 94, 9387. Oil pressure 63. It's pretty typical of the apex in cruise, even high RPM in the 60s. It's pretty normal. Oil pressure here, hovering around 60. That all looks good. So he comes out of takeoff, settles into about a 20-minute cruise in this section right here. All of this. But this purple line here, this violet line, is what we're going to be focused on. It all looks good here. You can see it bouncing around. If we zoom in, we can get to the nitty-gritty of it here. It has a very high sample rate. We could calm that down, but sometimes it's kind of nice to look at it. So 64 there of a high, 55, so about a 10 psi variation in cruise. That's all pretty normal. But we can see something right here. He does pick up the throttle, picks up the RPM after some time of cruise, but let's look at the oil pressure here. Look at these spikes starting. This is at higher RPM. We're starting to see some oil aeration. We're seeing a spike here of 69 to a low right here of 49. So 20 psi. We're now, it was earlier in the flight, it was 10 psi variation. Now we're seeing 20. 68, 54, but here's some real low, 49 to 69, 20 psi variation there. Looks like maybe even more over here. So if we look later in the flight, you can see the width here of the oil pressure gaining compared to here earlier in the flight. So he comes in, he lands, you can see the engine RPM coming down, comes all the way down, probably lands 3,500 on the ground, idling, taxiing, is going to take off again, and we go through it again. Oil pressure is not bad, it's not spiking a lot, pretty normal here, but as the high RPMs sustain for a while, we can see the oil pressure just starting to get aerated here and spikes up and down. Let's look at what kind of variation do we see here from a high here at 86 to 30 right here, 30 psi at 9,000 RPMs. That's not acceptable. We don't want to run that. So right here, here's these 5 takeoffs. This one has pretty broad. Let's zoom in here. Again, big variations. How about right here? 87 psi of oil to right here, 32 at 9,300 RPMs. The oil is definitely getting aerated and not maintaining oil pressure. And we can see it just gets worse and worse at these high RPMs being sustained for that period of time. So we need to route the oil a little differently, not through an oil cooler via the scavenge line. You're going to run it through from the a pancake adapter on the oil filter. So it'll be pressurized oil, but it'll be clean, non-aerated oil after the air has been taken out via the reservoir. So you can see this whole flight here, how we went through it. EGTs are down here. They all look great. The red line is cylinder 1. We're seeing a trend that, you know, even with a little bit of added fuel, cylinder 1 is commonly 50 degrees, 50, no more than 175 degrees cooler, because it's out there in the front getting the coolest air. So we're taking that as pretty normal. I think we've added 5% to cylinder 1, but you can see they run real nice, all even. This is an easy way to tell if you're getting a misfire. You'll see one cylinder can drop out. You start seeing 200, 300, 400 degree variations. Worth checking at a spark plug. So once again, you can see how valuable the data is in data logging, and how we can go in there and very easily see the real story, the true story of what's going on. Very definitive.
Alright, so the solution I came up with is this thermostat sandwich housing from Summit Racing. It fits in here just perfectly. It's a really tight space, and the size of it, you can see it just clears the engine case and it clears the heat exchanger inlet. Alright, voila, we're done. Okay, so we've got the filter on, the sandwich plate, the lines running to the cooler. Well guys, like I said, I was going to be honest with you about everything on this build, so that unfortunately didn't work, and here's why. This sandwich plate has a little square cutout right here for this thermostat, and unfortunately the size of the filter, the diameter of it leaves this corner here and this corner here just barely exposed. It's not wide enough, and the oil leaks out. So you can see that big spot on the ground over there. Quite a bit of oil leaked out. It was just pouring out, so obviously that's not going to work. The solution would be to put a bigger filter on it, which, you know, you could do, except there's not room for it. So this bar is in the way. I can't go any larger diameter filter. So this housing is not going to work. All right, real quick, guys. These are all the different sandwich plate adapters. Plus one I sent back already because it was very expensive. I got one from Improved Racing that had a thermostat in it. It was actually larger than this one, which is off of eBay. It had a thermostat built into it. It wouldn't fit, and it's really a tight fit in that space around the filter. There's some weird casting lumps in there on the engine housing. So this one was off of eBay, about 30 bucks, didn't work. The Improved Racing one didn't work. This one from Summit Racing actually has a built-in thermostat. You can see this little cutout right here. It's a little square, so you have the circle and then the square part. The part that's cut out right here just sits outside where the gasket lays on that filter, and therefore it didn't work. It leaked out those corners. Otherwise, it was the most promising so far. And I'll tell you how this could still be a viable option. So I resorted to contacting Thomas at Edge Performance, who makes one specific for the Apex. Really lightweight. Took 2 attempts to get it from him. DHL lost the first one, so he was gracious enough to send me a second one that was heavily taped in packaging so that it wouldn't go missing again. So this one will work, I hope. The only thing I have to figure out is which size hose to run. We've found on Brian Dacus's plane, he was running a different system that I'll explain here in a second, but he used -6 line, which is 3/8 hose, and he actually saw a little drop in oil pressure, and we're thinking that's due to the restriction of the hose. You can see the difference between a -6 size hose and a -10. It's a pretty significant difference. The -10 was what I was running on the scavenge line. It may be excessively big actually on a pressurized line, and I don't have everything I need to run the -10. I don't have the part that goes into these threads on this, which is a 22 millimeter by 1.5. I have them on order. They'll be here today for the -10. Edge Performance actually ships a whole kit that uses an additional coolant heat exchanger on their turbo engines to help cool the engine. That's why they make this part, and they ship it with -8, which is 1/2 inch, and that's probably the best size for what we're doing. I don't have any of that. I've got it sitting in my shopping cart at Summit right now, and waiting to pull the trigger on that to see when I get down to the airplane, see how everything fits up. If the 10 will fit, I may try that first. If it doesn't look like the fittings and everything will fit in that small space, I'll go with the 8s. In this process, I've brought the problem to Brian Dacus from day one. He's looked at it and analyzed it. He's also been really paying close attention to his oil temperatures under his application with the Apex on the Kitfox Model 4. As the temperatures have come up here now that we're in summer, he's seeing higher temperatures as well, and not quite as high as I'm getting, but enough that he also would like to see them down lower in the 190 to 200 range. So he started thinking about, well, maybe I should put an oil cooler, an airflow oil cooler on mine as well. So the two of us have been working on it now, and what we've actually found is it's pretty interesting. The original oil cooling system on this engine, it's in a bag I'm going to take out because it's all oily, but this is the heat exchanger. You have coolant running through it and then the oil flowing through it, and the coolant is supposed to cool the oil, or if the oil is cool, it will heat the oil. It's a heat exchanger, so it's supposed to try to match the coolant to the oil temperatures as close as possible. Obviously, in our application, we're using this engine at much warmer temperatures than you would in a snowmobile. There's not that many snowmobiles that they're out cruising around when it's 80 degrees out. I mean, it's possible, I guess, but it doesn't happen that often. Usually when you're running a snowmobile, you're going to be running it in around 30 degrees Fahrenheit or less. So the oil cooling system is not designed for an airplane that's operating in the summertime. So we found that that oil heat exchanger is completely inadequate for what we're doing. Furthermore, using a coolant heat exchanger to cool it when you have free airflow all the time, even when you're at idle, sitting on the ground, you have airflow over an oil cooler. I personally think that the oil cooled is a more proven form of cooling oil in aircraft. Every other engine does it, and there should be an additional oil cooling system, or isolate it so there is only an air oil cooling system on this application. So for you guys that are putting this on your plane, I would start looking at what we're doing, come up with your own solution, or look at what our final solution is going to be, and plan that into your design to use an air-cooled oil system on your plane. This part from Edge Performance comes in a kit that they do mostly for the turbo system, but they add an additional heat exchanger, so it's another coolant to oil system that you have to put somewhere. And I mean, this part's great. In my opinion, I'm not going to go with that because I don't want to run into the same problem where you're running. As soon as your coolant temperature starts going up, your cooling ability on your oil starts going down, and it just, I'd rather have the airflow. It's a cooler source of temperature, and it's very efficient in an airplane because of the speeds you're going to be flying at. The airflow oil cooling system just seems to make a whole lot more sense in an airplane. So that's what we're going with. Now, Brian actually and Ken Brown kind of dove into looking at where the heat exchanger mounts on the engine. It's right next to the oil filter. So you got the oil filter pad and then the heat exchanger pad. The oil filter pad has a stud sticking out that you screw your filter on. The heat exchanger has this bolt here that goes down through the heat exchanger and bolts in. So if you take this bolt out and then take another stud that like is on the filter side and screw it in, they're actually almost identical. The oil flow through is the same. So you can actually add an additional filter if you wanted to get rid of the heat exchanger. That doesn't make any sense. But what he did was he put a thermostat sandwich plate, it's very similar to this one, on the heat exchanger side. So he removed the heat exchanger completely, put a stud in there, screwed this down with the adapter, and then he took a oil filter takeoff or closeout plate like this one from Summit Racing, and this would go basically where your oil filter screws on. This would screw on instead. Then you would run to an oil cooler, a remote filter, and back. So he took one of these and he drilled a hole from the front through these two holes, but not out the back. And then he capped them all. So basically the oil came up, flowed over, and went back down again. I was going to do a very similar thing with this and just run a hose back to itself. This part could be customized. We can make one specifically for what we're trying to do. But then this part would go on top of the thermostat. I screw it in there, but I'll just take that out. So it's going to mount on there, whatever orientation you want. I think it has to go like that. So oil is going to come up the thermostat side, through the hole, and then back down again through the center bolt and back into the engine. So it's just looping in there. When the thermostat is open, that's what it's doing, or when it's closed, that's what it's doing. Otherwise, it's going to close out that hole and it's going to run the oil out through the oil cooler and then back to the engine. So this is basically, he designed it to replace the heat exchanger completely. And that's when we kind of found that when he was running without the heat exchanger, that thing actually works more as an oil heater than it does an oil cooler. Immediately he saw lower oil temps of about 20 degrees than what he was seeing with the heat exchanger. With the thermostat housing, it's bypassing during startup, so you're still getting it to heat up with the engine heat. You're not getting the coolant to heat it up, but then again, your coolant is also cold at startup. We have found that the coolant reaches operating temperature faster than the oil temperature. So the warm-up process might be a little bit longer not using a heat exchanger. But you really have to look at the application of the snowmobile versus the airplane. Snowmobiles are operating in much cooler temperatures all the time, so heating the oil during startup is more important. And the cooling of the oil is probably not as big of an issue because the ambient temperature is so much lower. We're talking at least, right now today is going to be 100 degrees here. That's 70 degrees warmer than you're probably going to see most of the time when you're out snowmobiling at 30 degrees or less. So again, I'm talking Fahrenheit for you guys outside the US. So that's his solution. He's testing that. We're going to see how that kind of pans out as far as the warm-up process goes. For me, I'm going to go with the Edge Performance sandwich plate for right now and leave the heat exchanger on there to help warm up the oil during startup. And that's all without a thermostat. So I may run into the problem of in the winter having too much oil cooling ability and have to either tape off the radiator or come up with a thermostat option. If that is the case, I will probably just switch to replacing the heat exchanger completely. That's why it's taken so long. It seems like such a simple thing to correct. It's just been waiting for the right parts and failing on the ones I've ordered not fitting. So having one I know will fit that's made specifically for this engine is a huge help. And if need be, I can use this one the way Brian did off of the other Takeoff for the heat exchanger. So long-winded explanation. Let's get down the airplane. I'll show you how this stuff gets installed and get this wrapped up so we can get some more flight time. Alright, for starters on the installation, see this little pin mark I made on this casting piece. It needs to be cut off, and it's just a little nub for the casting, so it shouldn't be an issue. But in order to clear the fitting coming off of the sandwich plate, that really needs to go. So what I'm going to start by doing is drilling a hole through it from the bottom, and then I'll take the Dremel tool if I can get in there and cut the rest off. It's kind of a tight space, so I hope I can get it out of there. But that has to come off first. Alright, so I took that little nub off. You can see the smooth part right up in there. Now there's no restriction on that sandwich plate in the fitting. It's tight, but it clears. However, you can't screw this fitting on without loosening up the sandwich plate because this little ridge right here, when you go to start the fitting, the B-nut hits that. So you got to kind of put it on before you tighten the sandwich plate down. That seems to work. So now I'm just going to run these lines to the radiator. Doesn't matter which one because one goes in, one goes out. So I'll see which ones are the easiest to do the turns on. I've got some fire sleeve, hopefully enough to do fire sleeve on it. And so basically all I'll do is make up those lines, put the O-ring behind this. Right now it's not on there. Tighten it down, screw the filter on, put some oil in it, and we'll be good to go. Alright, so here's the first oil line with fire sleeve on it. We've got the fittings on the end angled properly so they pop right in there and then up onto there. So number one done. We'll knock out the second one and get the second going. Alright, the long awaited sandwich plate is finally fit. See how tight it is over here, but it does clear everything, nothing's rubbing. Got my 90 degrees on. Oil lines are made up with fire sleeve on them. Some of you guys made comments about that. Comes down to the oil cooler. So pressured oil in a -8 AN line. That's 1/2 inch line. And should solve the problem. So put some oil in it. We'll do a run and a leak check real quick. Alright, so the leak check went really well. I didn't have any issues. I did a quick flight just to test it out, make sure everything was going to work. And it was about a half hour or so. Pulled all the cowlings, checked again for leaks, and everything looked good. So Tim and I hopped in the planes and went out again for another trip down to the river. And this time didn't have any issues with the pressure. There was a slight drop in pressure because you're running that pressurized oil through the cooler and back. So you saw maybe like a 5 psi drop overall of the pressure. We looked into that, and what the allowable pressures are for running this type of engine. Anything from 45 to 60 is normal. We're seeing about 50 to 55 on average, so I'm not concerned about it. It's very steady and the flow is good. So that worked great. The temperatures, it's hard to judge it because the ambient temperature was so much hotter than when I flew it with the scavenge line setup. I did see temperatures up to 228 on prolonged high power climbs, but overall it kind of sat right around 219 to 220 at the higher cruise settings, and then playing around on the river so that you're bringing up power and then bringing back power or doing pattern work type stuff. It was right around the 200 to 205 range, and that was on a really hot 90-degree day. So it's working great. Real happy with how it came out.
And then
I'm slowly being converted to the Apex.
I'm not even converted yet.
What's that?
Said I'm not even convinced yet.
Oh, I know, but I'm watching the performance. I'm digging it, so.
But it is a unique engine. Talking to my buddy Tim's got a Rotax on his Super Stol, and he's contemplating putting the Apex on. Roughly after this flight, it'll be about 10 hours in, and now that the temperatures have all settled in, we're really starting to play with the airplane more. The takeoff performance, I can lift off before I'm even indicating any airspeed. So the takeoff capability is way more impressive than I originally thought, and I was impressed to begin with.
Switch over.
Copy. Oh, what was I saying? So, yeah, we've been playing around with the airplane a little bit more. A couple things adjust. My shock pressure in the shocks is too much, so it's very stiff landing. I also have too much air pressure in the tires, so I need to soften up my landing a little bit to really take advantage of the shock monster. So I've got that adjustment to make. I'm still chasing this autopilot disconnect situation when I transmit. I thought I had it figured out. It's better, but there's still an issue with the antenna cable running from the radio to the antenna, causing interference with the serial input cable to the EFIS, so I need to work that out. Coolant and oil temps seem good. Power's solid. I noticed when I flew the other day I didn't have an issue with the coolant overflow, so I'll pull the cowling when I get back today and see what I got going on there. Binary traffic, flight of 2 on final for 3-3, 2-mile final, full stop. Right now I'm carrying about 63 mile per hour. I'm going to let that slow down to about 50. I'm a little fast right now. Bring in the other notch flaps. Gotta set the friction on this. The way I set up the throttle, it does drop off on you, or it pulls forward on you, so the throttle will come in if you don't keep your hand on it. So I'm at 53 right now, feels pretty good. Keeping the RPM up in case I need it. Flare it out. There we go. Make the first turn. That was kind of a sloppy landing. A lot of skidding around. Kitfox clear.
Number 2, short final, 3-3, Ben.
What I'm doing right now is I'm logging, saving the engine data from that flight. See right here, it's got all the parameters that were recorded during the flight. I was logging it, so I can go home and look at the engine. We can compare that oil pressure fluctuation like we talked about on Brian's video, and the portion of this video from Brian. I'll send this to him and he can look at it and see that we're not having the same problem by using the pressurized oil. I highly recommend using a supplemental oil cooling system on this engine. That heat exchanger is really a oil warmer. It's more intended to keep to help you warm up the oil on a snowmobile. I don't think it's adequate for the cooling, especially flying in this kind of environment. So an air-cooled oil cooler, I highly recommend. I think after we work out through the season of the summer and then in the winter and see which one of the systems between Brian's and mine kind of tends to work better for warming up and staying at the proper operating temperature in flight. I think either of them are going to be a good solution, but we'll try to work out which one's the best. And then hopefully we can provide that as a kit, if you guys want to put them on yours. But if you're building right now and you're planning on doing an Apex, plan on putting an oil cooler on it. I just highly recommend that. So we saw warm temps today. Hottest temp I got was 228, which is well within the range. Anything under 240 is okay. But when we first started flying this, it was much cooler out, like 60 degrees at altitude was the warmest day I think we flew. And we're hitting 240 and I had to end the flight because it was still going up. So this was 83. It's now 92 here on the ground, but 83 was our temperature at altitude. The highest oil temperature I saw running it hard was 228 degrees. Most of the time flying around, playing on the river, it was right around 200, which is great. So time will tell whether I need a slightly larger radiator or if that's going to do it, but I don't really see myself flying in warmer temperatures than today. I'm really only out flying this week because I need to get the hours flown off on it. When it gets up above 100 here in Redding, which it will be for the next 10 days, it's actually 108 yesterday, should be 108 today. I don't like flying when it's that hot. Even with the doors open, we're flying around, it's 83 degrees at altitude, it's still warm. I don't mean to be a weenie about the about the temperatures, but I don't like flying in hot weather. So this is a good indication of the more extreme side of the heat that I'm going to be flying in, and it seemed to work really well. So I'm happy with that solution. So thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. I also got a little announcement on the Reno stuff here that I'll cut in here at the end.
I want to leave you guys with a little comparison between the Yamaha Performance and the Kitfox and the Rotex, the big bore kit performance on the Just Aircraft Super STOL. The Super STOL has great landing performance. It can land really short, but I also want to show you the takeoff performance difference. So this is a pretty warm day. We're out early, so it's not, up above 100 yet, but it was high 80s, getting into the 90s as we were doing these takeoff and landings here on this short little sandbar island, actually. So right there you can see the shorter landing of the Super STOL. Watch the takeoff difference as far as the climb out power with the Apex. The other thing you can compare is the sound from the Rotex versus the sound from the Apex. I think this muffler setup has really quieted it down to the point where it's actually a little quieter than the Rotex setup. So you can back that up again and listen to it one more time if you want to see the difference in the noise. And getting pretty happy with this setup.
Hit this next one on the right.
Yeah, I'll hit the island here. I got you inside.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Reno Air Races this year, which are September 15th through the 19th. It's going to be a fantastic group of guys there. Quite a few more racers than there were the first year. And they're doing a training program for the new racers. It's going to be really fantastic. I encourage everyone to come out if you can make it out to see the Reno Air Races and the STOL Drag competition. So looking forward to doing that. It is quite a commitment this year, so I am looking at possibly bringing on some sponsors for the trip. So if you guys are interested in sponsoring an aircraft at Reno in the STOL Drag competitions, go ahead and contact me through the Bowen Aero at Yahoo, and we can talk about what we can do to help each other out as far as advertising and costs of the trip and everything. So if you guys are interested and want to sponsor the Project Kitfox race team, go ahead and get a hold of me, and I'll have some more information on that in upcoming videos. Thanks again for watching. I'm just going to let this run with some of the flying we're doing on the river. It was so awesome to get back out and enjoy flying again after this long build and hiatus from actually getting out and flying. Everything had changed. The river was different. All the river bars were different. So it was really fun to get out and explore again. All right, until next time, I'm signing off. We'll get another video out as soon as I have something important to tell you guys.